My name is Anna, and I want to share with you something that completely transformed my life. Before it all began, I was someone many would consider normal. I had a job that allowed me to live comfortably, friends with whom I shared happy moments, and a loving family always by my side. At first glance, my life seemed to be in order. I smiled, went out with friends, and attended family gatherings. But what no one knew was that, inside of me, things were changing, and not for the better. Little by little, I began to notice a difference that I couldn't explain. It all started with a constant feeling of exhaustion. It wasn't a physical tiredness, but something that drained me from within. I felt heavy, as if I were carrying an invisible burden, and that burden was becoming increasingly unbearable. The small joys of everyday life began to fade. The things that used to make me smile, a walk at sunset, a hot coffee in the morning, the laughter of friends, suddenly lost their brightness. It was as if the color had started to disappear from my life. Initially, I thought it was just a bad phase. Maybe it was work stress or some kind of hormonal change. I kept telling myself that it would soon pass, that it was just a matter of time until things returned to normal. But the days went by, and that feeling only got worse. Weeks turned into months, and before I realized it, I was sinking deeper and deeper. The desire to go out, to meet people, to be with those I loved, slowly vanished. I began to isolate myself and avoid contact with friends and family, not because I wanted to, but because I simply didn't have the strength to pretend I was okay anymore. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and not recognizing the person I saw there. The face seemed the same, but the eyes no longer had that old sparkle. I asked myself, what happened to me? Where did the Anna go who was happy, full of dreams and plans? It was as if I were looking at someone who had been completely erased, someone in whom pain and sadness had settled without permission. And no matter how hard I tried to fight it, it seemed that with each passing day, the sadness grew stronger, more suffocating. The hardest part of it all was this feeling of emptiness. It was as if there was an enormous hole inside me and I had no idea how to fill it. Nothing seemed enough. I tried to keep my mind occupied with work. I tried finding distractions. I tried holding on to small moments of happiness, but nothing filled that void. I didn't know how to lift that weight off my chest, and at some point, I began to get used to it, to accept that maybe this was my new reality. There were days when getting out of bed was a battle, and there were nights when tears were my only company. I would cry until I had no strength left, a silent cry that I hid from everyone around me. I didn't want people to see how much I was suffering. I didn't want them to think I was weak or to pity me. And because of that, I isolated myself even more, carrying alone a burden I had no idea how to relieve. Deep down in my heart, I felt that I was losing myself, and that scared me. What I didn't know was that this period of darkness was taking me to a crucial point, a point where I would have to make a decision that would change my entire trajectory. And without even realizing it, I was about to discover that God had far greater plans for me than I could ever have imagined. I reached a point where I felt completely lost. It was as if I were in free fall, descending into a bottomless pit, and every attempt to hold on to something only made me sink further. Depression was consuming me, devouring everything good I had, and the worst part was that I couldn't find a way out. I remember waking up every morning with a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe, a tightness that paralyzed me. Even when the day was sunny, all I could see was gray. The routine became an unbearable burden. The simplest tasks, like brushing my teeth or taking a shower, felt like monumental challenges, as if I were carrying tons of weight. There was no desire to do anything, no strength. I remember looking at the clock and watching the hours pass by, wondering if any of it would ever make sense again. But in those moments, it seemed like hope was a distant memory. There were days when I just couldn't get out of bed. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything to give me a reason to get up. The silence of my room was my only companion, and that silence sometimes became deafening. It felt like, with each passing day, life was becoming more empty, more meaningless. The smiles of the people around me hurt, because I could no longer feel what they felt. I felt disconnected from the world, as if there were an invisible barrier between me and everything good. During this period, I experienced a kind of pain that wasn't physical, but it felt like it was in every cell of my body. It was a suffering so intense that it left me breathless. The feeling was like being trapped in a storm, surrounded by enormous waves that were pushing me under while I helplessly tried to reach the surface. And with each failed attempt, exhaustion consumed me even more. I tried seeking help in various ways. I saw doctors, tried medications, and went to therapy sessions. And while those resources gave me some temporary relief, I still felt that emptiness. It seemed that what I was experiencing wasn't just a physical or mental illness. It was a wound in my soul. Something inside me was broken, something that no words or medicine could fix. And the feeling of failure, of helplessness, only made me sink deeper. There was a specific moment that I will never forget. It was a Saturday night. I was home alone, sitting on the floor of my living room, and I started to cry. But these weren't ordinary tears. It was a cry that seemed to come from the deepest part of me, a cry of despair. I cried until I had no strength left, until my eyes were swollen and my voice had disappeared. In that moment, all I wanted was for the pain to stop. I just wanted peace. I wanted to feel anything other than that overwhelming sadness. I started to believe that maybe I would never find joy again, that maybe that pain was permanent. I saw all the doors closed. There was nowhere to run, nothing to do. And there, on the floor of my living room, alone and with a shattered heart, I reached the lowest point of my life. I had no more hope, and the thought of living with that suffering forever was unbearable. I felt like I was being swallowed by a darkness that would never end. In that moment, I had no other option but to look up. When there was nothing left for me to hold on to, I realized that maybe the only chance I had was to cry out for something greater than myself. And so, in that place of complete despair, a tiny spark of faith was born inside me. I had nothing left to lose. I needed help. I needed a way out. I needed God, even though I didn't know how to ask, even though I didn't know if He would hear me. It was in that state, broken and without strength, that something began to change within me, something I would only understand later. But at that moment, in the depths of my despair, I was about to experience the beginning of a transformation that I never imagined was possible. At that moment, when I could no longer see a way out, something inside me urged me to make one final attempt. I remember being so tired of fighting alone, so exhausted, that I felt an urgent need to cry out to God. It wasn't a rehearsed prayer, it wasn't pretty words. It was a desperate cry from my soul, a plea for help. That night, I fell to my knees on my bedroom floor, tears streaming down my face, and I simply said, "God, if you are there, please help me. I don't know what to do anymore. I have no strength, and I need you." As I said those words, I realized how vulnerable I was. I had always been someone who liked to be in control, but there I was, on my knees, without a single solution, without masks or barriers. It was just me and my sincere plea for help. I remember how the tears wouldn't stop, and I sobbed like a child who had lost her mother. There was so much pain trapped inside me, and at that moment, it felt like everything was coming to the surface. And then something unexpected happened. There were no thunderclaps, no visible miracle before my eyes. But there, on my knees, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. It was as if time had stopped, as if, for a brief moment, all the weight had been lifted from my shoulders. A warm feeling enveloped me, something almost indescribable, like an invisible hug. It felt like someone was right there beside me, holding me and saying, "I am here, Anna. You are not alone." I didn't know how to explain what was happening, but I felt a presence so real, so comforting, that even in that place of deep pain, my heart began to feel something different: hope. I felt as if God was telling me that there was still a way for me, that my story didn't need to end there, in that dark pit. It was then that I realized that, all that time, I had been trying to fight with my own strength, not realizing that there was a God who had always been waiting for me, ready to reach out and lift me up. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without that anxiety. The pain was still there, but there was something more, a spark of peace, a certainty that I no longer had to carry this weight alone. In the following days, I kept seeking that presence. I started praying every day, not with fancy words or rehearsed speeches, but sincerely. I spoke to God as one would speak to a friend, telling Him about my pain, my anxieties, my fears. And with each prayer, I felt as though a little more of that weight was being lifted off my chest. I remember opening the Bible without much direction, looking for something that would bring me comfort. And it seemed like every time I read, the words spoke directly to my heart. God began to show me that even in the moments when I thought He had abandoned me, He was there. He had never left me. It was I who, in the midst of the suffering, had distanced myself, had lost sight of the love that was always present, waiting to rescue me. One of the most intense moments of this journey was when I read Psalm 34:18. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. That verse was like balm for my soul. For the first time, I began to believe that God cared for me, that He saw my suffering, and that He had never left me alone. It was as if, little by little, I was being rebuilt. God's answer didn't come all at once, but it came in ways I never expected. He used small moments, a sunrise, a message from a friend, a song playing just when I needed to hear it. And with each of these signs, I felt my heart filling with life again, with hope. God was there with me, guiding me back to the light. After that night when I cried out to God, things didn't change instantly. I didn't wake up the next day free from all the suffering, but something had changed inside me. It was as if, finally, I had found the spark of hope that was missing. And it was that tiny hope that gave me the strength to take the next steps. God's response began to manifest in subtle yet powerful ways, and gradually the healing process began. I started to feel a deep need to seek God's presence every day. Before, I barely had the strength to get out of bed, but now there was something inside me motivating me to try again. I remember how, in those first mornings, I forced myself to pray, even when I had no words. Sometimes it was just me sitting there in silence, but I felt He was listening. Slowly, my heart began to open. Praying became less of an obligation and more of a moment of relief, a safe space where I could pour out everything that was in my heart. One of the most transformative parts of this process was rediscovering the Word of God. I began reading the Bible in a different way, as someone who is searching for something they truly need. And, surprisingly, each time I read, I felt those words were being spoken directly to me. Verses I had heard before began to come alive, to have real meaning for my situation. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28 became a personal invitation to me. It was as if Jesus were speaking directly to my heart. Anna, come to me. I want to give you rest. Gradually, I began to see changes in my routine. Small habits, like thanking God when I woke up, became essential for me. Each morning was a victory, and I started to recognize that. I remember one day in particular when I opened the window and saw the sun rising. It had been so long since I'd noticed such simple things, and in that moment, I just felt gratitude. A genuine gratitude for being alive, for being able to breathe, for having the chance to start again. That was when I realized that God was not just taking away the pain, He was teaching me to value life again, to see the beauty in the simplest of things. During this process, God also began to send people to help me. I remember a friend, someone I hadn't seen in months, suddenly called me. She told me she had felt in her heart the need to talk to me, and when I told her everything I was going through, she welcomed me without judgment, only with love. She prayed for me, and I realized that God was using people around me to bring support, to remind me that I was not alone. That conversation gave me new energy, and I realized that God really moved in details, in gestures of love that often go unnoticed. I also started going back to church, even though, at first, it was difficult to leave the house. I remember the first time I went back to a service. I was nervous, afraid that people would see how fragile I still was. But when I entered that place, I was received with so much love, with such genuine smiles that my heart was warmed. During the worship, I felt as if God was speaking to me through each word sung. It was as if He were telling me that I was loved, that there was a purpose for my life, and that He was taking care of me. The healing was not linear. There were days when the weight returned, days when the tears came back for no reason. But even on those hard days, I knew that now I had a refuge, a place to run to. God was showing me that healing wasn't a one-time event, but a process of restoration, a journey in which I needed to trust Him every step of the way. And each time I fell, I realized that I wasn't falling alone anymore, because He was there to lift me up. And so, gradually, that huge hole inside me began to be filled. Not with material things, not with fleeting distractions, but with God's presence. It was as if He was taking every broken piece of my heart and putting it back together in an even better way. What used to be emptiness was now filled with love, peace, and hope. The feeling of abandonment was replaced by the certainty that I was cared for, that there was someone who loved me unconditionally. This healing process, although long and full of ups and downs, was an experience that transformed me deeply. It wasn't just about taking away the sadness, but about giving me a new outlook on life, a new purpose, a renewed faith. God was teaching me to live again, to trust Him in every detail, and to recognize that even in the greatest storms, He was with me, holding my hand and guiding me every step of the way. When I think about where I was before and look at where God has brought me, I realize that something truly miraculous has happened. After months of living in darkness, I finally began to see the light again. The healing process that God started in my life didn't just ease the weight of depression, He did so much more. He brought a new joy, a genuine joy unlike anything I had ever experienced. A joy that didn't depend on the circumstances around me, but came from within, from knowing that I was safe in God's hands. I began to notice this transformation in the small details of my daily life. I remember the first time I woke up and felt like getting out of bed. Not out of obligation, but out of a desire to live. I felt a longing to see the world outside, to enjoy the day, and not just survive. That was an important milestone for me. That genuine desire to live was something I thought would never come back. And there I was, opening the window and feeling the wind on my face, noticing the beauty in the simple act of breathing, of being alive. The smile, the one that seemed lost for so long, came back gradually. At first, it was shy, almost a surprise. I remember laughing at something someone said and being caught off guard by it. It was a different feeling, a real laugh that came from the heart. And I cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief and gratitude because I realized that joy was returning. God was restoring every broken piece of my soul, showing me that I could still feel happiness, that light could still shine in my life. Little by little, I also started to take back the things I used to love doing. I went for walks in the park, smelled the flowers, listened to the birds sing. I started meeting my friends again. At first, I was afraid that people would notice how fragile I still was. But surprisingly, being surrounded by loved ones was another blessing in my restoration process. I realized that God was putting the right people in my path, those who welcomed me, who made me feel loved and accepted just as I was, scars and all. One of the biggest changes I experienced was in the way I viewed life. Before, I was always so worried about controlling everything, about maintaining an appearance that everything was fine. But when I surrendered to God, He showed me that true control was in His hands, and that was liberating. I started to live one day at a time, trusting that He was taking care of every detail, and that brought a lightness I had never felt before. I learned to trust more, to rest in the certainty that God was by my side, guiding my steps. I also began to serve more. The transformation God was working in me created a deep desire in my heart to help others who were going through what I went through. I joined groups at church, started sharing my story, and realized that my pain hadn't been in vain. I could use my experience to bring comfort, to bear witness to God's restorative power. Every time someone came up to me saying they felt the same way I once did, I had the opportunity to say, I know what it's like, but I also know that God can transform this pain. He did it for me, and He can do it for you. I remember one specific moment during a prayer meeting at church. During the worship, I felt such deep joy that I couldn't hold back the tears. But this time, they were tears of gratitude. I felt as if all the weight I had carried for so long had finally been left behind. In that instant, I understood that God had not only taken away my pain, but had transformed it into something beautiful, something that could serve as a testimony of His goodness. That joy was more than just a fleeting feeling. It was the certainty that I was loved, that there was a purpose for my life, and that God had a plan for me. God restored my joy in such a complete way that today, when I look back, I hardly recognize the person I was during that dark period. The things that used to paralyze me are now memories of a struggle that I overcame. I feel an immense gratitude for each day, for each small detail, because I know that none of this would be possible without divine intervention. Every sunrise, every smile shared, every simple moment that used to go unnoticed, now it's all a reason to celebrate. I am living proof that God transforms, that He is capable of restoring even what seems to be completely broken. He didn't just take away the weight of depression, He brought renewed meaning to my life, a purpose that goes beyond myself. The true joy He gave me is one that isn't shaken by the daily challenges because it's rooted in something much greater, in the unconditional love of the Father, who found me when I was lost and brought me back to life. Today, as I share my story, my greatest desire is for you who are listening to know that you are not alone. If you find yourself in a place of pain, in a place where everything seems colorless and meaningless, I want you to know that there is a way out. I know what it's like to feel that the weight of life is too much, that each day is a battle against your own mind. But I also know, from personal experience, that there is a God who sees every tear and cares for every wound. When I was at rock bottom, without strength, without hope, God found me. He heard me when I cried out, even when I didn't have the strength to believe that I could be heard. He not only heard me, but acted and lifted me from a place I never imagined I could leave. If He did this for me, He can also do it for you. God doesn't show favoritism. His love and His grace are available to anyone willing to open their heart and let Him in. Maybe right now, you are facing depression, or maybe you are feeling a deep emptiness that no one around you can understand. I want to encourage you to do what I did that night. Cry out to God. It doesn't have to be a perfect prayer. It doesn't have to be anything other than a sincere plea for help. God is closer than we imagine, and He is waiting for the moment when we open our hearts so He can act. I know it can be hard to believe, especially when we are in the midst of pain, but I can guarantee you, He is listening. God is the loving Father who never abandons us. He is close to the brokenhearted, to those who no longer have the strength to carry on alone. And that's exactly how I felt, broken and without strength. But it was in that place of complete fragility that I found true strength, not in myself, but in Him. He gave me a new beginning, gave me joy where there was sadness, gave me hope where there was only despair. If I could encourage you to do one thing today, it would be to give God a chance. Maybe you are tired, just like I was. Maybe you have tried everything and nothing seems to work. But there is a God who sees your suffering and wants to help you get through this storm. No matter how deep the pit you are in, God is able to reach down and pull you out. He did it for me, and He will do it for you if you let Him. I also want to remind you that God not only works to ease our suffering, but He restores us from the inside out, giving us a purpose, a reason to live. Often, our pain can become a testimony to help others, just like I am doing today. I never imagined that my struggle would one day become a message of hope, but that is exactly how God works. He turns what used to be pain into something beautiful and full of purpose. So, if you are going through the valley of shadow, remember this: you are not alone. Even when everything seems lost, God is with you and He will not give up on you. I am proof of that, and I know He also wants to transform your story. Let God be your light. Let Him take care of you and show you that there is true joy, a peace that the world cannot give, but that comes directly from His love. I want to finish by praying for you, for everyone listening to this testimony who needs a touch from the Holy Spirit. Close your eyes with me and allow God to speak to your heart. Dear Father, I want to thank You for the opportunity to share Your goodness and transforming power. Lord, I cry out for each person who is listening to this testimony and going through a time of pain and darkness. May You embrace them with Your love. May they feel Your presence now, bringing peace, comfort, and hope. Father, may they experience Your restorative power, just as I did. May You heal every broken heart, dry every tear, and bring the true joy that can only come from You. I know that You are capable of transforming any situation, and I thank You in advance for everything You will do in each life. In Jesus' name, amen. May this message reach your heart, and may you feel God's presence wherever you are. Always remember, you are loved, you are valuable, and God has wonderful plans for your life. May His light shine in every dark corner of your soul, and may the joy that comes from the Lord be restored in you. Never give up, because God will never give up on you. If this testimony touched your heart, if you felt hope while listening to this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs an encouraging word, a light in the midst of darkness. Many people are facing silent battles, and maybe this message is exactly what they need to find new hope in God. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss other testimonies of faith and transformation. And remember, you can also be an instrument of God to bring this message of love and restoration to other lives. Together, let's spread the light and the truth of God's love. Share and be a blessing in someone's life today.